In 1942, a 37-year-old psychiatrist was stripped of everything he had ever owned: his home, his research, his identity. He was given a number tattooed on his arm and told that the number was now his name. He was separated from his wife, his mother, his brother. He would never see most of them again. He was transporting to Auschwitz, one of the most brutal death camps in human history. And in that darkness, surrounded by death and suffering and absolute despair, he made a discovery that would change the way we understand the human mind forever. His name was Viktor Frankl, and what he found inside the camps became one of the most important books ever written: Man's Search for Meaning. This is not a comfortable book. It was never meant to be. It was written in 9 days by a man who had survived 4 Nazi concentration camps and lost almost everyone he loved. It is a book about the worst that human beings can do to each other. But it is also, paradoxically, a book about the best that human beings are capable of, about the one freedom that can never be taken away, about why some people survive the unsurvivable while others give up and die, about what it means to be alive when everything around you is trying to kill you, and about what happens to a human being when every external reason to live has been destroyed and the only thing left is the question, why? Viktor Frankl was born in Vienna in 1905. From a young age, he was fascinated by the mind, by what drives human behavior, by what gives people the will to live or the desire to die. He studied psychiatry and developed his own school of thought, which he called logotherapy, from the Greek word logos, meaning meaning. His central idea was simple but revolutionary. The primary drive of human beings is not pleasure, as Freud suggested, and not power, as Adler suggested. The primary drive is the search for meaning. We can endure almost any how if we have a why. By the time the Nazis rose to power, Frankl was already a respected psychiatrist with a growing reputation. He had a wife he loved, a family, a practice, a future. Then the world collapsed. In September 1942, Frankl and his entire family were arrested and deported. He arrived at Auschwitz with a manuscript hidden in his coat, years of work, the foundations of his life's theory. The manuscript was taken and destroyed. He arrived with nothing. He left with everything that mattered. The book is divided into 2 parts. The first is a raw, unflinching account of life inside the concentration camps. Frankl describes the arrival, the initial shock, the selection process where SS officers pointed left or right, deciding in seconds who would live and who would die immediately. He describes the stripping away of identity, the clothes, the possessions, the names, the hair. He describes the labor, the cold, the hunger, the violence, the constant presence of death. But he describes something else too, something that the guards could not take, no matter how hard they tried: the inner life of the prisoners, the invisible freedom that existed even inside the camps. Frankl observed that among the prisoners, those who survived longest were not always the strongest or the healthiest. They were the ones who had a reason to survive: a person waiting to see a child again, a person with a mission left unfinished, a person holding onto a memory of love so vivid and so powerful that it gave them the strength to endure one more day. He watched men give away their last piece of bread to someone weaker. He watched people find moments of beauty, a sunset glimpsed through barbed wire, a joke whispered between starving men, a prayer spoken in silence. These moments were not escapes from reality, they were reality. They were proof that something in the human spirit cannot be destroyed even when the body is being destroyed. He wrote about a particular night when he and a group of prisoners were marching to work in the dark and the cold. They were stumbling, falling, cursing the guards, cursing the ice beneath their feet. And then one of them began to talk about his wife. He could not see her, he did not know if she was alive, but he spoke of her with such tenderness and such certainty that something shifted in the group. Frankl looked up at the sky and saw the stars beginning to fade and the first pale light of dawn appearing. And in that moment, he understood something he would spend the rest of his life trying to articulate: that love is the highest goal a human being can aspire to, that even in the absence of everything, of food, of warmth, of safety, of hope, love remains. And where love remains, meaning remains. And where meaning remains, the will to live remains. This is the central revelation of man's search for meaning. Not that suffering is good, not that we should seek pain, but that suffering, when it cannot be avoided, can be given meaning. And suffering that has meaning can be endured. Frankl describes the difference between prisoners who gave up and those who did not as ultimately a difference of meaning. Those who had lost their why, who could see no reason to survive, no one waiting for them, no unfinished purpose, were the first to die. Not always from the guards, sometimes simply from within. They stopped fighting, they stopped eating, they turned their face to the wall, and they were gone within days. The second part of the book introduces logotherapy, Frankl's formal theory, developed and refined through his experience in the camps. The core principle is this: meaning can be found in three ways: through work, by doing something significant, creating something, contributing something to the world; through love, by connecting deeply with another person and caring about something beyond yourself; and through suffering, by choosing how you respond to pain that cannot be avoided. This third source is the most counterintuitive and the most profound. Frankl was not saying that suffering is meaningful in itself. He was saying that we always have the freedom to choose our attitude towards suffering, and that choice, the last human freedom that can never be taken, is itself a source of meaning. He described a patient who came to him after the war, destroyed by grief after the death of his wife. The man could not understand why he had to go on living. Frankl did not offer comfort. He did not minimize the pain. Instead, he asked the man a simple question: what would have happened if you had died first and she had survived? The man went pale. He said, "She would have suffered terribly." Frankl said, "You have been spared that suffering. Your grief is the price of your love, and it is a price worth paying." The man said nothing. He simply stood up, shook Frankl's hand, and walked out of the office. Nothing had changed, and everything had changed. He had found his why. After the war, Frankl returned to Vienna. He had survived 4 camps: Auschwitz, Dachau, and 2 others. His wife had died in Bergen-Belsen. His mother had been killed in Auschwitz. His brother had died in a camp. He had lost almost everything, and yet he rebuilt. He rewrote his manuscript from memory. He developed logotherapy into a full school of psychotherapy. He married again. He lectured around the world. He lived to the age of 92, and he never stopped insisting on the fundamental dignity of human beings, on the freedom that exists even in chains, on the meaning that can be found even in the darkest places. Man's Search for Meaning has sold over 16 million copies. It has been translated into more than 24 languages. It has been named by the United States Library of Congress as one of the 10 most influential books in America. It has been read by presidents and prisoners, by soldiers and survivors, by anyone who has ever stood in front of suffering and asked the oldest human question: why? So what does this book teach us today? 3 things that are as true now as they were in Auschwitz. First, meaning is not found, it is created. Frankl did not wait for the universe to give him a reason to live. He created one. He chose to see his suffering as material for understanding. He chose to survive so he could tell the story. He chose love as his anchor even when the person he loved was gone. You do not find meaning by waiting for it to arrive. You find it by deciding what your suffering, your work, your love is for. The question is not what you expect from life. The question is what life expects from you. Second, the last freedom is always yours. Frankl wrote that everything can be taken from a person except one thing: the freedom to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. The guards could take his clothes, his food, his family, his future. They could not take the space between stimulus and response. That space, however small, however difficult to access, is where human dignity lives, where character is formed, where meaning is born. No circumstance, however brutal, can remove that space entirely, and in that space is everything. Third, suffering without meaning destroys, suffering with meaning transforms. The prisoners who survived longest were not those who suffered least. They were those who understood why they were suffering or who decided why. The same is true in ordinary life. The person who loses a job and sees only failure will be destroyed by it. The person who loses a job and sees it as the beginning of something necessary will be transformed by it. The suffering is the same, the meaning is different. And the meaning changes everything. Viktor Frankl walked out of Auschwitz with nothing but his life and his theory. The theory was this: we are not driven by pleasure or by power, we are driven by meaning. And as long as we can find meaning, or create it, or choose it, we are free, truly free, in a way that no guard, no circumstance, no amount of suffering can ever take away. There is a moment in the book that Frankl describes with such precision and such stillness that it stops you completely. He was being marched to a work site before dawn. The ground was frozen. The guards were shouting. The man beside him was stumbling, nearly falling with every step. And Frankl's mind, in that moment of absolute physical misery, did something extraordinary. It left. Not in despair, not in madness, but in love. He found himself thinking about his wife. Not about whether she was alive or dead, not about the camp or the cold or the hunger, just about her face, the sound of her laugh, the way she looked at him. And he felt in that moment something he could only describe as joy. Not happiness, not relief, joy. The deep, irreducible joy of a person who loves and knows that the love is real regardless of what happens to the beloved. He wrote later that he understood in that moment that love is the only thing that survives everything. That a person can be destroyed and love can remain. That love does not require the presence of the loved one to be real. It exists in the one who loves. And as long as it exists there, it cannot be taken. This is perhaps the most radical idea in the entire book, more radical than the theory, more radical than the observations about survival. The idea that love is not a transaction between two people. It is a state of being within one person. You do not need the other person to be present for your love to be real. You do not need them to be alive. You do not need them to know. The love is yours. It lives in you. And it gives you meaning regardless of whether it is ever returned or acknowledged or even possible. Frankl loved his wife in Auschwitz. He did not know she was already dead. And the love was real. It sustained him. It gave him his reason. It was enough. After the war, when Frankl was rebuilding his life and his work, he was often asked how he had survived, how he had not broken, how he had come out of 4 camps with his mind intact and his spirit undefeated. He always gave the same answer. He had a why. The why was his work. He needed to survive to write the book, to share the theory, to give the experience meaning by turning it into something useful for others. The why was his love. Even in the absence of the person he loved, the love itself was his anchor. And the why was his choice. Every single day, in the smallest ways available to him, he chose to remain human, to notice beauty, to help another prisoner, to refuse to become what the guards wanted him to become. These choices cost him nothing material. They cost him everything in terms of effort and will, and they were the difference between survival and destruction. Logotherapy, as a formal therapy, works by helping people find or create their own why, not by giving them answers. Frankl was explicit about this. A therapist cannot give a patient meaning. Meaning cannot be prescribed or transferred. It can only be discovered by the individual through their own reflection, their own choices, their own engagement with their life. What a therapist can do is hold up a mirror, ask the right questions, create the space in which the patient can hear their own answers. The question is never what does life mean in general. The question is always what does your life mean to you right now in this specific situation with these specific circumstances. And the answer is always unique, always personal, always yours. This is why the book has endured. Not because it offers a system, not because it gives you 10 steps to a meaningful life, but because it asks you the one question that cannot be avoided forever. What is your why? What are you living for? What would you be willing to suffer for? What love, what work, what purpose is so important to you that you would endure the worst to protect it? These are not comfortable questions. They are the most important questions a human being can ask. And man's search for meaning does not answer them for you. It simply makes it impossible to pretend they do not exist. There is one more story from the camps that Frankl tells, and it is perhaps the most important of all. Near the end of the war, when liberation was finally approaching, Frankl observed something deeply troubling. Some of the prisoners, the ones who had survived the longest, who had endured the most, began to die in the final weeks before freedom, not from illness or from the guards, from the loss of hope. They had fixed their minds on a specific date, a rumor that liberation would come by a certain day. When that day passed and they were still in the camp, something broke in them. The hope had been conditional. It had been attached to an external event, and when the external event did not materialize, the hope collapsed, and with the hope, the will to live. Frankl's conclusion from this observation was devastating in its simplicity. Hope must never be tied to a specific external outcome. Hope must be rooted in something internal, in meaning, in purpose, in the unconditional decision to live for something regardless of when or whether external circumstances change. The moment your hope depends entirely on something outside yourself, You have made yourself hostage to the world, and the world does not keep its promises. Only you can keep yours. Frankl survived. He wrote the book. He built the theory. He lived 92 years and spent most of them trying to answer the same question in 1,000 different ways, the question that Auschwitz had forced him to ask, and that he could never stop asking because the answer was too important and too urgent and too often forgotten by people living comfortable lives who had never been forced to confront it directly. What are you living for? Not in general, not philosophically, but right now, today, this week. What is your why? Because without a why, the how does not matter. Without a why, comfort is not enough and success is not enough and pleasure is not enough. Without a why, a person can have everything and feel nothing. And with a why, a real why, a chosen why, a why that has been tested and held on to even when everything else was taken, a person can have nothing and feel everything. Numenwood.